Hey everybody! So today we're going to talk about the asteroid Chiron. This is the card for it. And so like I said, Chiron is not a planet, it is an asteroid, a giant asteroid. So how I've mentioned before, the planet is what energy needs to be expressed. The house is the area of life or where the energy is expressed, and the sign is how the energy is expressed. Chiron would be a what? It functions like a planet in this way. It can be thought of like a planet in this way because Chiron is energy, is what's needing to be expressed, but it is not a planet. Just to make that clear, off the bat. So Chiron has, like Lilith, Chiron has a mythology behind it that probably needs to be explored. I'm not going to go too deep into it here in this video, just for time reasons. But so if anybody's like, oh, you didn't mention this, that, or the other, it's for time purposes. But essentially Chiron was half man, half horse. He's a centaur. Real father was Kronos or Saturn. But he was raised by Apollo, and he was a healer of sorts. He was a teacher. He was a good centaur. A lot of them kind of, it seems like, operated kind of like heathens. Chiron was not that way. So, and I've read different things here in this regard. So it seems like he was with Hercules. They were drinking some wine in a cave. When the bottle was opened, a bunch of other centaurs wanted to drink this wine that was given to somebody by Dionysus. And a fight broke out, and Hercules ended up shooting poison arrows, I believe, at some of the other centaurs, and Chiron ended up getting hit on accident. Now, since Chiron was not completely mortal, he couldn't die from this. So he was living in extreme pain, right? From this poison arrow, from getting shot with this poison arrow. And Hercules went to Zeus and begged Zeus to, release Chiron from his suffering. So then Zeus was like, yeah, that's fine, I guess, but he'll have to take the place of Prometheus, who is chained to a rock and having his liver pecked by a bird. And then he will no longer, if he trades places with him, he'll no longer be mortal and he can die. So Chiron took Zeus up on that offer. That's kind of the quick and dirty of the mythology to Chiron. I know that there is a lot more there, but that's kind of the general mythology. And again, I've read different accounts of this, and I mean, it is all mythology, so who really knows? But that might actually be kind of a hodgepodge between, the different things that I've read. Anyway, Chiron is the wounded healer. That is what this asteroid represents in the natal chart. It is the wound that oozes, that just oozes. And I'll be honest, I'm not really sure that you can fully ever heal Chiron in your chart. I'm not sure that you can. I'm also not sure you're supposed to, necessarily. Like, okay, that sounds really negative. I don't mean it that way. I really don't. But I think, I think where Chiron is in your chart, it tends to show where you are most wounded. How by sign, and what area of life, or where by house. And I think, it's one of those things that, you work on it. You work on that wounding. You work on that wounding. And you might level up, right? And work on it. But then something else is thrown your way that kind of wounds it again. And some of this might be to see what you've learned already. And I do think there's an element of this to it, because Kronos was Chiron's father. Kronos is another name for Saturn. Saturn is a teacher too. So I do think there is something to be said about this learning element, right? And I think we can heal it. I don't think we ever completely heal it, but I think we can heal some of it in one stage and then other parts of it in another stage. Does that kind of make sense? I'm not sure it's ever completely healed, though. It's probably not completely healed until we finally pass on somewhere else to where we go next. Kind of like in the mythology where Chiron can't die until he trades places with Prometheus and, is no longer mortal, and, then his pain ends when he dies. I think that's kind of how what Chiron represents. That doesn't mean that your entire life has to be painful, though, where Chiron falls in your chart and how by sign. But I do think that there always probably is a little bit of pain there that you have to consciously and constantly work through at different times in your life. More work through it in a more involved way than others at some points, But Chiron, Chiron is Chiron wounding tends to occur in childhood, I think. I wouldn't necessarily give it an age, like it has to happen before this age for it to be Chiron wounding. I don't think it necessarily has to be like that. I don't think there's that sort of rigidness to it, but I think it probably does tend to happen in childhood and adolescence. I think it probably happens younger than older, than as you're older. I think as you're older, it gets rewounded, or it can, So with that being said, by house, that'll give you an idea of where this wounding might be in your life. Like, I don't know if you have it in the fourth house. This wounding might have to do with, your home, your family, when you were growing up. It could. That's not universal, but it could. That could play in. Falling in the 11th house, perhaps there is wounding regarding feeling like you can go after your long-term goals. Things of that nature. Perhaps there's been wounding with groups of friends and things like that. Chiron in the 7th house, wounding stemming from one-on-one relationships. And then, the sign would show how this wounding comes about. Chiron in Capricorn, there might be wounding regarding how masterful or how much authority the person feels like they have, in whatever house it falls. Chiron in, say, Virgo, might have to do with not feeling like, the person might feel like, Chiron might be expressed like they're not good enough, not perfect enough, those kinds of things. Again, none of this is universal, but these are some ways that it plays out, or that it could play out. Chiron conjunct, or making I'll say a harsh contact with a major angle, with like the ascendant, the descendant, the IC or the MC. That tends to be difficult because it's touching it's either touching, your sense of self and the way that you naturally express yourself outwardly, the core being the IC, the descendant, the shadow part of yourself, things like that. And the MC would be feeling like you can reach that highest version of yourself. Chiron might wound that. So having it on an angle is, having it on a major angle is hard, or making a harsh contact to a major angle, that is hard. It can be challenging. There's usually, I would think that definitely catches my attention. There's usually something to be said about that. Generally, anyway. Let me see. I wanted to make sure I'm not really missing anything. There's a lot that I could say here, so I'm just going to mention a couple other things real briefly. So our coping mechanisms, the way that we cope with things, Chiron can kind of show that. Depending on what Chiron is doing in your chart, this could, I kind of think of the coping mechanisms. They could be they could be unhealthy, or ideally they would be healthy altogether. But if they had to be unhealthy, you would grow to make them healthy. Does that make sense? Ideally, that's the way it would go, you know. Survival mechanisms, same sort of thing, like coping mechanisms, same sort of idea there. Let me see. Sacrifice. Sacrifice definitely plays in here. With Chiron will kind of might express that too. Might want to express that. But definitely take a look at where Chiron is in your chart. I think it's important. I know there's some people that don't really fuck with Chiron. We do. Me and Natalie do. So we would encourage anybody to take a look at that. And anybody that's interested in, sometimes I'll see things on forums or even get asked questions by clients about shadow work. Chiron is such an important part of doing shadow work. It really is. This asteroid is super important for doing that shadow work, bringing those things out of the shadows. Even if it doesn't have any contact with the descendant, which is the shadow side, there is something, you know, we don't always want to acknowledge that this pain, this core wounding exists, right? It's not comfortable. Nobody really wants to. Well, I guess some people might want to acknowledge it, but then there are other people that would really rather not. It depends on what it's doing in your chart. But this is definitely shadow work. This is definitely something you'd want to look at for shadow work. Absolutely. Anyway, this has already gotten pretty long. So I'm going to go. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can find us on Instagram at Let's Fuck With Astrology. I'm at Saturn Season Astrology on Instagram. Natalie is at Aviturno Astrology on Instagram. If you're watching this on Instagram, you can find us on YouTube at Let's Fuck With Astrology. If you are, sorry, like total with my mind. If you do the Reddit thing, you can go to the subreddit Let's Fuck With Astrology. Check us out. And if you're interested in the star cards, you can go to letsfuckwithastrology.com/star-cards. Okay, sorry. My brain went real stupid for a second. I'll see y'all later.